Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. Truckers of Reddit. What's the strangest or most bizarre thing you've come across at a truck stop or on the road? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I worked as a taxi driver, and a decent amount of the drivers were at one point over-the-road truck drivers. I heard two stories that just boggled my mind. One consisted of a guy that bailed out of his truck he was losing on a downslope side of a mountain. He had a seatbelt on. He would have had time to bail out of the truck while they went down a 1,000-foot drop somewhere back east. The other story that just blew my mind was when another driver was 100 feet behind a semi that perfectly T-boned a Yukon at highway speeds. The Yukon was full of the family. He was first on site and didn't have enough blankets for the deceased. He took the next 2 days off, calling his family freaking out. The next month, he was applying to be a taxi driver. This happened to my dad, and he isn't a trucker, but it is still a trucking story. My dad was working for Pillsbury Food, who had recently bought another company that was starting to do business with fresh vegetables rather than canned. I think it was Green Giant. Anyways, the fresh vegetables were sometimes shipped in from Mexico in refrigerated trucks. Unfortunately, Pillsbury kept getting shipments of broccoli, green beans, etc. that were spoiled. They suspected that the Mexican truckers were turning off the refrigeration unit in their trucks in order to save gasoline. The company decided to send people down to Mexico to ride with the truckers to make sure they didn't turn off their fridges. My dad was one of the people. So, cut to a road in a Mexican desert, and my dad is riding along with a Mexican truck driver who speaks approximately 0 words of English. It is apparently getting dark out, and the driver tries to turn his headlights on, but they don't go on. My dad tries to ask the driver if they're going to stop and try to fix the lights or something, but the guy just says something in Spanish and keeps driving. Not too much later, and it starts to get really dark, and the driver is only going about 30 miles an hour. In the dark with absolutely no lights, my dad is getting pretty scared. Finally, a small car drives up behind them and passes. The driver says, "Aha," and starts to speed up and tailgate the little sedan. He's trying to use the lights of the little car ahead of them so he can go faster. Imagine being this poor guy who passes a giant dark truck on a dark road. Then the truck starts following right behind you. When you slow down to 30, it slows down to 30. Then when you speed up to 90, it stays right on your tail. Terrifying. So, in the cab, my dad is getting really nervous. Finally, the little car they were following around just swerves off the road and drives into the desert. The guy probably thought this ghost truck was going to be his death. The trucker just swears in Spanish and slows way down. After a few more minutes, he just looks at my dad and goes, "Aha!" He comes to a stop, digs around in the back for a minute, and pops back out with a huge Bowie knife. He holds it up in front of my dad and says, "Aha!" Now my dad thinks he's going to die on a dark road at the hands of a crazy Mexican trucker. The trucker just uses the knife, though, to pry open something on the dash where the switch for the light is. Then he goes outside and fiddles around. After a few minutes, he comes back in, messes with some wires, and the lights go on. Then he starts just driving. And my dad just sits terrified for several more hours until finally they arrive. I used to drive trucks in Iraq as a GI. We had a massive up-armored 915 tractor trailers, and we were locked and loaded the whole time. The civilian trucks, we called them whites, drove cheap paper-thin white, hence the name Mercedes tractors. Anyway, I saw plenty of stuff, but the scariest was watching a kid run across the opposite lane of a highway, run out between two cars, and get smashed by a tractor doing like 80. He flew for like 40 feet and hit the pavement, where he turned into human mush. Imagine the road at that speed is a giant belt sander. I also saw a 3-legged donkey getting effed by a camel and a kid holding a Grim Reaper scythe sitting on a rock in a field, jacking his D like there was no tomorrow. Trucking in Iraq, there is nothing like it. I was a truck driver in the Army in Iraq in 2003. Our main mission was hauling fuel to various camps in Iraq from Kuwait. On day 8 of us, 4 trucks had to deliver some civilian refrigerated trailers to some small camp that was repairing the refrigeration on the trailers. These trailers were utter crap. When I say civilian, I don't mean USA civilian, I mean Iraqi civilian. Of the 8 tires, I think there were 2 axles. We started with 7 good tires. And by good, I mean not flat. Let me say that again. We started with a flat tire, but they were not our trailers. And there was no way in hell we were putting a military-owned spare on there. It was an empty trailer, so we figured the 7 other tires would be fine for the 200 miles we had to go. We stopped twice in those 200 miles. The first time, there was another flat tire on the other axle on the other side of the trailer. That left 3 inflated tires on each side of the trailer. Good enough for us. Next stop, another flat tire. We kept going. Then, 10 out from our destination, I'm driving along this dirt road somewhere in southern Iraq. I had no idea where the hell it was. I look in the driver's side mirror, and I see one of the tires rolling away from the trailer and along the side of the road for about a mile. The sergeant was in the passenger seat, and I just started and stared at it. We're still driving at about 59 miles an hour, governed at that. Both of us are just going, what the do we stop? Do you just keep driving? We kept driving and waved goodbye to that tire. We pulled into this dinky little camp and dropped the 4 trailers. We did a final walk around. We could hear a hissing as another tire was leaking. In the end, a good tire on one axle and one on the other axle on the other side. With that missing tire complete, we didn't care, left it as is and got the hell out of there. My father worked for a mining company, moving the equipment from site to site. So on one job, he was going down into a valley one afternoon fully loaded, and towards the bottom of the valley, he shifted a gear up too early. The lower gears help control your speed and can help you slow down when you need it, and saw as he rounded the bend that an oil trucker was pulling out of the bottom of the valley, which was about 3/4 mile away. The grade was too steep, and he was going too fast, but he didn't care. He slammed the brakes, smoking them to high hell, because he knew he needed all that time he could to manage. Fortunately, the truckers running the same job coming the opposite direction with no load saw the situation building and got on the CB radio, telling him they were going to slow down to a crawl so he could pass in the oncoming lane. That saved his life, and to this day it still gives him the shakes to tell that story. I was robbed at gunpoint by 2 men. I just finished a 12-hour drive from Pennsylvania to Michigan. I dropped off the timber I was carrying and got paid cash up front. I was heading back to my truck when a couple of young men approached me with their hands behind their backs or in a cargo pocket. I suspected the worst and jumped in my truck hurriedly and opened up my dashboard and took out my .357. The 2 men come to my truck window and stick a gun through the window. I freaked the shit out. I scream at the top of my lungs all sorts of profanities and threats. The men bolt to get behind my truck, and being the F-tard that I was, I got out to chase them. Before I could even get my feet on the ground, I hear gunshots. I duck and stumble the rest of the way out of my truck to the ground. By this point, and I had returned fire, I heard 2 gunshots from the same gun. These were followed by maybe 3 or 4 more, and then I returned fire. I was in a semi-crouching position with my back to the truck, one hand and my right one shielding my face, and my left hand pointed toward my attackers. I only remember pulling the trigger once, but there were 4 of my bullet casings on the ground, one very young man's body. The other punk ran off once he saw what happened. The police arrived 20 to 30 seconds after the kid went down. They must have been able to hear what was going on. They arrived and cuffed me, set me in the back of a police car, and we had a little chat. I drove the 8 to 9 hours home, and I'm not afraid to admit I cried the whole way home. But I'm glad that I wasn't hurt. I have a family to provide for, and I'm not sure if they could make it without me. And I would go through it all again just to be there for my family. I never did get my license, but my dad was a trucker, so I figured I should at least try it out. I got my permit and was bobtailing around our home country for practice with my dad sitting shotgun. You may not know this, but those things can haul ass when they're not pulling anything. The power, the height, giving you a view of the road, the feel of control over a huge machine, it's a rush. Anyhow, I'm bombing around in this thing and come through a quaint little town in the middle of the day. Speed limit's 40, so I'm doing 40 on the nose. A woman blows through her stop sign on a road coming from downshifting and right about 50 yards ahead of me. I can't recall exactly what combination of hammering the brakes and downshifting I used to attempt to slow the truck, but what I was very specifically doing, remember, is not swearing because Dad wouldn't like that. The street was tight, full of traffic, both vehicular and pedestrian, so there was nowhere to swerve. Momentum depends as much on mass as it does on speed, and this wasn't any tiny truck. So if I didn't stop before she got onto the road, she was toast. Luckily, for all involved, she saw me and she crossing into my path. Word turned white as a sheet and floored it in reverse. I continued out of town without saying a word, but turned to my dad when we were back on the highway. Me. What would have happened if she hadn't gotten out of the way? She'd have been crushed, he said, calm as he always was in a cab. Would have been her fault, though. I never did end up getting my license. I've got a few short stories, so I'll try to toss them together. Deadheading, driving with an empty trailer to pick up in upstate New York in the middle of winter with tires that were barely legal. I was climbing a hill and the truck just kept slowing down until the truck isn't making any more forward progress, even though the wheels are turning. Hit the brakes and slid back down the hill about 10 feet. I didn't have any chains and I was out of cell reception, and my Qualcomm satellite communications had no signal. I finally decided to drop the truck into first gear and just try to crawl up that hill. It took a good 10 minutes, though it felt longer, before I crested the hill and was able to continue on. Driving around OKC when a bad storm blew in, I was with my trainer at the time, and I was toward the end of my driving hours. There were reports of funnel clouds to the north of us. I called into the back to wake him up, told him there were funnel clouds about 2 miles north of us, and that I wasn't stopping until we got out of the worst of the storm. The law be damned. He was okay with my assessment of the situation. A bad ice storm came through the Midwest in early '09. I was driving in the worst of it. Hadn't been able to go faster than 45 the entire day. I finally got to a 3-lane interstate that had been plowed and cleared, and traffic was going full highway speed. I was about 4 truck lengths behind the truck in front of me when he started braking hard. I hit my brakes and nothing. No slowing at all. I was on black ice, and all I could see was the truck in front of me getting closer. I moved side to side in my lane to try to find any traction. It wasn't until I crossed the lane lines that I was finally able to start slowing down. In the progress of doing this, I managed to sideswipe a Penske moving truck. I pulled over as soon as I could, and they pulled up behind me. Thankfully, none of them were hurt, and neither truck had any damage behind a couple of scrapes. Driving in the mountains of Pennsylvania during the winter with the same shitty tires from the first story, crested a hill, and I'm on my way down. Then the car that had passed me at the top of the hill pulls in front of me. I hit my brakes, but I can't slow down enough due to the road being covered in slush. I pulled into the left lane and easily passed the car, even while braking. At the bottom of the hill, I hit the truck and the thick slush pile, and my drive tires start to slide out. I turned into the slide, and it was able to strengthen out the truck, and that maybe car and the car backed way off. I was driving from Texas into Louisiana when one of the hurricanes was coming in. I was supposed to pick up the last load from a paper plant before they closed down. Besides emergency vehicles heading to staging areas, I was the only vehicle headed east. The westbound lanes were packed. Aside from that surreal moment, the pickup went without a hitch, and I started hauling ass from there. I got back into Texas, and I'm talking to my dad about how weird it was to drive toward a hurricane when a pickup truck cuts me off to pull into Walmart. I throw down the phone and lock up the brakes, only to feel and hear the 6,000-pound rolls of paper slide and slam into the front of the trailer. I got to a truck stop and weighed the load. My drive axles had over 50,000 pounds on them. Law is 34,000 max, and I couldn't return to the plant to have them resituate the load. My company ended up hiring a tow truck company with a winch truck, and with the winch and some serious muscle power, we were able to wrangle the paper rolls back into place. My first solo load was a load of beer going from Ohio into West Virginia. I didn't have a GPS yet, and the company I worked for was shit at giving directions. But that wasn't the worst part. The load was easily overweight by thousands of pounds. When I told the company, they told me that there were no weigh stations between where I was and the delivery, and that I should take the load anyways. With this being my first load, I didn't have the balls to stand up to the company, so I ran with it. The only way to get to my destination was this squiggly little state highway. It was full of tight corners, switchbacks, and lots of hills. There was one time when I looked in my mirror to see the outer tire of my trailer tandems actually hanging off the side of the road, literally about 8 inches from having the truck and trailer tumble into a ravine. By the time I got to where I was going, my hands were cramped from gripping the steering wheel, and my left leg was cramped from having to shift constantly. These all happened within about 8 months of each other. There's a lot of good little stories in there, so thank you for sharing. And the next one is wholesome plus 100, so enjoy. One time back in 75 or 76, I was coming into a small town in the south when I heard a little boy's voice on the CB. He said, "Breaker 19, is anyone there? Come on back, truckers, and talk to Teddy Bear." I said, "You got a teddy bear?" The boy came back, "Appreciate the breaker. Who we got on that end?" I told him my name, and he said, "I'm not supposed to bother you fellas out there. Mom says you're busy, and for me to stay off radio. But I get lonely, and it helps to talk because that's about all I can do. I'm crippled and I can't walk." I told him I'd talk to him as long as he'd like. "This was my dad's radio," he said, "but I guess it's mine and Mom's now because Dad is dead. Dad had a wreck about a month ago. He was trying to get home in blinding snow. Mom has to work now, and I'm not much help with my 2 crippled feet," she says. "Don't worry, we'll make it, but I hear her crying sometimes late at night. You know, there's one thing I want to see more than anything else. I know you guys are too busy to bother with me, but my dad used to take me for rides when he was home. I guess that's all over now since my daddy's gone." Not one breaker came on as the little crippled boy talked with me. I tried hard to hold back tears as I thought about my own boy back in Greenville. Teddy Bear said Dad was going to take Mom and me with him later on the year. He used to tell me, "Someday this old truck will be yours." I now know I'll never get to ride an 18-wheeler again. But this old CB will keep me in touch with all my trucker friends. Teddy Bear is going to leave you now because it's time for Mom to come home. But give me a shout when you're passing through, and I'll sure be happy to talk to you. I said, "Before you go, 1010, what's your home 20, little CB friend?" He gave me his address, and I didn't hesitate. The freight can wait. I turned my truck on a dime and headed straight for Jackson Street. As I rounded the corner, I got one heck of a shock. 18-wheelers were lined up for 3 city blocks. I guess every driver for miles around had heard Teddy Bear talking with me on the radio, and that little crippled boy was having a ball because as fast as one driver would carry him in, another would carry him to his truck and take off again. I took my turn hauling Teddy Bear, and then I carried him back and put him down in his chair. If I never lived to see happiness again, I saw it that day in the face of that little man. We took up a collection for him before his mama got home. Every driver said goodbye, and when they were all gone, Teddy Bear shook my hand with a mile-long grin and said, "So long, trucker. I'll catch you again." Before I hit the interstate, I had tears in my eyes. I turned on the radio, and I got another surprise. "Breaker 19," came the voice on the air. "Just one word of thanks from Mama and Teddy Bear. We wish each and every one a special prayer because you just made my little boy's dream come true. I'll sign off now before I start to cry. May God ride with you, 10-4, and say goodbye."